has been theorized that long ago, across the vastness of space, in a star system known as Alpha Draconis, an advanced race of reptilian beings left their world and embarked on a cosmic journey through the galaxies. Upon reaching our solar system, they discovered a third planet from the sun, rich with life, and inhabited by primitive humanoid beings. Recognizing the plentiful biological resources of planet Earth, a plan was put into effect to seize the planet for their own and to enslave the vulnerable humanoids for their own needs. Today, their descendants nefariously coexist with us, able to shapeshift into any form they choose to remain hidden. They wield global power with an agenda of deceit and annihilation of the human race. 0 hour is upon us. Brace yourselves. We are surrounded by a multitude of conspiracy theories. The flat earth, chemtrails, the assassination of JFK, humans living in a simulation, artificial disease, vaccines created by the government to control us, the moon landing, 9/11, the Illuminati, Planet X. Those are just the tip of the iceberg, but one of the strangest and well-known, and growing more prominent by the day, is that of the reptilians, our sapient beings, resembling that of both humans and reptiles. Serpentine or lizard-like creatures with evil intent or posing threats on humans have been around for a long time. But it wasn't until the late 1990s that the idea of reptilians was popularized by former footballer and sports broadcaster David Icke, who in 1990 visited a psychic that told him he was on Earth for the sole purpose to receive messages from the spirit world. A few years later, he began speaking of a conspiracy theory, claiming shape-shifting reptilian aliens took control of the Earth by taking on human form and gaining political power to manipulate human societies. Icke has stated on multiple occasions that many world leaders are possessed by so-called reptilians, but there are others who believe that all of these supernatural and interdimensional ideas are all interconnected, that maybe these draconian laws aren't the lizard people we've come to know. Some say these theories go back to times long ago, starting with ancient texts and religious teachings, with events dating back to the very beginning of human beings. Get ready to open your mind and prepare yourself for the many possible realities that could tell us what's been really happening in our universe, and the notion that a race of malevolent beings from another star system have infiltrated Earth with the plan to enslave humanity and exploit our planet's physical and biological resources.
When I was young, I experienced seeing something that was very extra-dimensional appeared to me at one point. And mind you, I was like 8. Rare thing about me, I've actually never done a drug in my life. I've never even drinking a drop of alcohol. When this thing happened to me, it was such a profound experience where I physically saw something appear to me. It sort of changed my reality. It broke my perspective of what I thought was okay, because I was kind of a sciencey type kid, and then all of a sudden I see something physically appear before me, and I'm like, okay, am I hallucinating? Am I a crazy person? What is this thing? And it caused this sort of profound desire to understand the things that we may not know necessarily or may not see that are around us.
As a young boy, Brian had an encounter with an entity that one might describe as an experience with a shadow person. When a patch of shadow is perceived as a living human-like figure and interpreted as the presence of a spirit or demonic entity by someone who believes in the paranormal, these are termed as shadow people or shadow beings and are common in a variety of belief systems and religions.
This was something that I started to explore, trying to understand, like, okay, how could I physically have seen something? And my parents came in the room when I saw this thing and was screaming about it, and they did not see it, and that was what just drove me a little bit, like, whoa, like, what is this? Like, how can when somebody physically see something? For a while of my research, I started to think, hey, maybe I'm crazy, maybe I hallucinated, maybe that was it. Your eyes can only see a certain amount of color spectrum. And so your eyes only see so much. And then your ears can only hear so many different sounds. So there's other colors, there's other light spectrum, and there's other sounds going around us right now at all times. And it makes you wonder, like, are people that are, schizophrenic, are they necessarily, like, always crazy? Or are they maybe possibly seeing or hearing something on a light wave or a sound frequency that you just naturally don't perceive?
Brian spent many years growing up with no other strange incidents occurring, well into his teenage years. The second experience was more profound, as he had two friends that also witnessed certain aspects of Brian's secondary, otherworldly encounter.
After seeing the thing and realizing, okay, there's more to life than what we just tangibly can feel, I realized, okay, maybe there's something else. But I started to doubt whether I was, like, hallucinating and whatever. And then my friends and me went out to a field to light up some big firework thing we made. On our way back, the sky lit up like lightning, just boom. And it went from nighttime to daytime completely. And this actually did it once on our way there, but on our way back, we did it a second time and then a third time. And then we look up and we can see, it almost looks like something shoots across the sky. And when you see that glimpse of something, it's like, it's hard to fathom. It was so bright that your eyes couldn't even adjust. And it was like the whole sky just went nighttime, daytime. And we thought, did we been nuked? Had a transformer exploded? We were trying to understand what was going on. My two friends, we stayed there for about 10 minutes staring up at the sky, trying to see, like, oh man, like, I'm like thinking, I gotta see this thing. Like, I'm not gonna believe it unless I see it, because it almost looked like you could see something shooting across the sky, trailing this light. So we're standing there, and then one of my friends is like, I'm bored. My other friend's like, I'm going with him. So they start walking away, and out of the corner of my eye, it starts to glow, and I start to see more light and more light and more light. And I look over at my friends, and behind them is a glowing, walking person that I don't know how to describe this person. Was completely illuminated in light. I could see its hands, its legs. I could see him take like 3 steps and boom, just like went into itself. And so like it just vanished. And my two friends immediately heard, it like kind of made a sound. And then my two friends immediately turned around and were like, what was that? And I'm like about, I want to say like a good 30 feet away at this point, because they had walked pretty far away from me. They turn around and they see me standing far, far away, and they're like, what did you just do? They're like, did you just teleport? And I'm like, I'm kind of in shock staring at the thing that I saw. And I'm like, I didn't teleport. I'm like, but I don't know what you guys think you happened, but there was a glowing walking person following you, which was a really fascinating experience. They could hear the footsteps. They told me, look, you weren't following us. And I was like, no, I wasn't following you at all. But there was definitely something following you. And they're like, we heard the footsteps and we saw all this light. And then we heard a noise and we turn around and suddenly you're 30 feet away. And so it was such a mind-boggling thing. And after that experience, it kind of validated to me that, okay, maybe from the initial experience where I thought maybe I was hallucinating or maybe I was crazy, after I saw the secondary experience, I was like, all right, there's got to be something more in the world that we're not quantifying, we're not able to identify, we're not able to see, or something like that. So I made some immense efforts from that point in my life. I was about, I don't know, 16 or so, and from that point in my life on, I just became engulfed in researching and finding out the answers to what is the glowing thing and what is this other entity, shadow-like creature thing that appeared to me. A lot of people have these theories that are out there talking about reptilians, like Hillary Clinton or something's a reptilian, and all these famous people are reptilians. They believe that there's like these secret, scaly beings that are secretly controlling the world. And this idea came from a guy by the name of David Icke. He was a news sportscaster, and he had some experience, and then all of a sudden had this epiphany moment where he's like, there's secret reptilians controlling the whole world, which is kind of absurd in my personal opinion, but I think there is some element of truth. And I think all things that have some craziness to it, a lot of times comes from something originally that had truth, and then it spun off in this direction. And I think the reptilian thing is kind of a misleading component. I would say that reptilians don't necessarily exist in the sense that people have portrayed them to exist online. Reptilians are a derivative of what you might claim as an alien, which is also a deception, if you will, and that's a derivative of something else supernatural that we have yet to identify in our records of sorts. But I believe that these beings are indeed derived from something of truth, and that truth is very, very easy to find throughout our history. So if you start looking into the history of all of our ancient books, all of our ancient writings, the Bible, you're going to start to see some parallels that will pop out to you, that you're going to be like, hey, wow, this is fascinating. This lines up with stuff in Greek mythology. Wow, the Bible here lines up with these things over here in Egyptology. This lines up with these components. And so all of these sort of ancient writings sort of overlap and align.
There's a fabric of lies that's been sewn together for thousands of years, and you start to understand that it's all driven by something that wants to deceive people.
When it comes to the reptilians specifically, there's a lot of things out there in our ancient history that sort of allude to this serpent-like thing, or reptilian-type entities. I don't know if you're aware, but the Vatican, it looks like the head of a snake. It even has like teeth and like a tongue coming out. Or in the Bible, there's a type of angel called a seraphim, which is a specific type of angel. Seraphim, the angel, translates also as snake. There is a powerful group of individuals that are trying to sort of control and direct the whole world, if you will, into this sort of new world order perspective that's being controlled. And David Icke is sort of touching on that element, but then he adds this whole other, and they're lizard people. And so it kind of makes you want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And it's a red herring, if you will. Basically, people go, there's no people controlling the world. Like, you're like, maybe there is. But then when the person tells you, oh, and they're lizard people, you're kind of like, okay, there's definitely not anyone controlling the world at this point. So it's sort of a way to misdirect you, if you will, to not think that the other stuff that David Icke might be saying could possibly be accurate to some degree.
It's another facade that these entities are putting on, because it's all about deception. It's deceiving people. You know, the whole abduction thing, you know, the whole people that have been abducted. Usually the abducted people who tell these stories of what happened, they usually have a channel of, they've opened a portal some way. And what I mean by that is you can open a portal any way you want to. You know, it's about intent, and it's about, I am doing this because of this, and this But usually it's with occult objects like tarot cards or Ouija boards or anything like that. You are opening a portal for entities or things to come through, and they can manifest in any way they possibly can. And so the whole thing about the blood, these dracoids, reptilians sucking blood, and all this stuff. I mean, it's kind of wonder. You gotta think about it, because in the satanic world, there's blood rituals. Why are there blood rituals? Well, it's all about the blood. It's even the vampires. Life is the blood. It's like it's all about blood. And ironically, these demons don't have blood. They're bloodless. So some say that they could never be forgiven, and that's why they're obsessed with it. And then, of course, adrenochrome, people drinking this blood to become younger and to get high and all this crazy stuff. And it's just a fascinating world, but it's really, really, it's full of deception. I mean, biblically, God forbade the occult in the Bible. Why did he do this? Because you are opening your mind to deception. And the enemy is always referred to as the father of lies. Okay, the father of lies. So anything working with the enemy is an emissary of the father of lies.
More specifically with reptilians, what I think it is that they are witnessing these elite aliens, if you will, that are reptilian in nature, that are controlling the world. These aliens actually have roots from where this sort of information is derived from, and they're called Nephilim.
Nephilim, in the Hebrew Bible, were a group of mysterious beings, or people of unusually large size and strength, who lived both before and after the Great Flood. The Nephilim are referenced in Genesis and Numbers, and are possibly referred to in Ezekiel. In Genesis 6:4, Nephilim were called the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. It is told that they are half human and half fallen angel, and are also described as being of a demonic nature.
There is actually this other book of the Bible that wasn't put directly in the Bible, but it doesn't necessarily devalidate it in some way. And again, a thing about the Bible, a lot of people want to look at the Bible and say, oh, that's a religious text, stop talking, I don't want to hear it. The Bible is not a religious text. I would say the Bible is a history book of where you came from and where you basically are in the universe.
You can only understand the Bible through revelation, not the book. But if it is revealed to you, and how is the Bible revealed to you? It's called the Holy Spirit opens the eyes of your heart.
So your perspective on the Bible a lot of times might be a little bit skewed, but you really, if you want to take it like for what it is, you got to look at it as like, hey, this is a really ancient writing that hasn't changed from centuries, but it hasn't changed, and it's very fascinating.
There's also something that if it truly was written divinely by the Holy Spirit, it will never change, and it never has changed.
And in fact, we found this thing called the Dead Sea Scrolls.
The Dead Sea Scrolls, ancient Jewish and Hebrew manuscripts, were discovered in the Judean desert and Qumran caves between 1941 and 1956. The texts have great historical, religious, and linguistic significance because they include the second oldest known surviving manuscripts of works later included in the Hebrew Bible canon, along with extra-biblical manuscripts that preserve evidence of diversity in religious thoughts. The new Dead Sea Scrolls fragments, considered the oldest ever discovered, were found in Israel as of March 2021.
We compared the text of these ancient scripts that we found on the side of the Dead Sea, and we compared them with what the Hebrew Bible was being held at in their temples, and we compared the text, and it was like 100% identical.
The only way to really perceive if the Bible is true, first of all, historically it's true. It goes back, they say, oh, it's been written over 1 million times. No, it's written through man, not by man. Through man means it was divinely inspired, inerrant. they found the pieces of the text recently from thousands of years ago, and they exactly match from the Aramaic and the Greek, and they exactly match what we have today.
So we discover this writing, and we compare these things, and we realize inside that Dead Sea Scrolls is this book that has been missing, that's just kind of like sort of a key to a lot of understanding this reptilian type stuff as well.
But it's fascinating to hold that candle up to the demonic world and see what's really going on.
This missing book is called the Book of Enoch.
The Book of the Watchers is the first section in the Book of Enoch in this book. It describes the fall of the Watchers, the angels who fathered the Nephilim, and narrates the travels of Enoch in the heavens, according to the Western scholars. This section is said to have been composed in the 3rd or 4th century BC.
It's the 3rd most copied book in the Dead Sea Scrolls. After finding it in the Dead Sea Scrolls, kind of validates that it was supposed to be in the Bible, and that for some reason it just wasn't put in there by the Catholic Church when they were canonizing it. But this book talks more specifically about these angels that came down from heaven and mated with women and created a race of giants that took over the earth, which, mind you, in Greek mythology, giants are the Greek gods. And then they're called Anakim, the angels are in the Bible, and their children are called Nephilim.
There was something called Nephilim, which was demons who looked at how fine the women were that God created and had sex with them and created Nephilim, which are half demon and half man, men of great renown. They were giants.
They have relationships and were born to them giants, and they were known as the men of renown.
See, there's a whole thing about giants in the world that people are not talking about. In Europe, in a lot of the museums, there are bones of giants, not in America. Even though there's many pictures of them finding giant Nephilim bones in America. And Smithsonian supposedly has them all. You know, they just don't want any of that known.
They had special powers, if you will, and abilities, and they were super strong and became super famous and kind of took over the whole world. And actually, the story of Greek mythology is actually the story of these angels saying that they were God, and they took over the whole earth. And then God flooded the earth, which is actually wiping out the Greek mythology sort of premise that had taken over.
But the thing is, with the Nephilim, you're half human, so you die. But the spirit part of it becomes a demon that always looking for something else to possess, because it remembers being possessing that body.
And so they took over the whole earth, and they mated with humans, and they said that they were God, and they lied. They lied to everyone. And then basically, that is the story of why God flooded the earth.
A flood myth, or deluge myth, is a parable in which a great flood, usually sent by a deity or deities, destroys civilization, often in an act of divine retribution or as a measure for the cleansing of humanity. In preparation for rebirth, the most well-known of these stories is Noah and his ark, told in the Bible.
Christ was prophesied to be born through a bloodline of David. So anything they could do to screw up that bloodline, the Christ would never be born. Thus, Nephilim, they started interfering with the bloodline and having children. So anything to screw up the bloodline,
That kind of talks about these entities, and it changes your perspective of the Bible to some degree, because you realize that these race of giant beings and super beings, if you will, because they're of varying size, but these super beings basically continued to take over the earth. And that was the entire battle throughout the Bible. In fact, I'm sure many of you have heard of David and Goliath. Well, Goliath was one of these super beings. He's called a Nephilim. I'm sure you've heard of Sodom and Gomorrah. I don't know if you're familiar, but this is a story that a lot of Christians will tell you it was about homosexuality and that God wiped out the whole city of Sodom and Gomorrah because of homosexuality. When reality is, when you look in Sodom and Gomorrah in the actual story in the Bible, you find out that there is this word great men and lesser men. And the word great men is actually the same word used that was born to the children, the great men, the giants, the men of renown. So you find out that the story of Sodom and Gomorrah changes very different. And in fact, in Hebrew, the word homosexuality is a specific word in Hebrew, but it's not the word that's used in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. In fact, it says seeking after strange flesh, which makes you wonder, why does the church adopt this word for the word term sodomy? Is kind of unusual when the Bible doesn't even use this term. It actually uses the word seeking after strange flesh. And it doesn't say anything else other than that. It doesn't say bestiality, which is also another term that is in the Hebrew, has a word for it. So the strange flesh kind of makes you wonder. We don't really know what that is, but when you read the word great men, you realize the city of Sodom and Gomorrah was trying to remake the lineage of these half-angel, human Nephilim creatures. Another point about Sodom and Gomorrah you can kind of take away from this is that every time an angel appears to someone in the Bible, the person sees the angel and is frightened or says, "Oh my gosh, are you for me? Are you against me? Don't hurt me." Except for one time. When the angels appear in the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, the men of the city say, "Give us those men so we can have our way with them." That right there tells you there's a little bit something different about the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, that they see these glowing, powerful, angelic beings and think, "Give them to us so we can take advantage of them." So you know that there's something different about them. Jonah and the whale. A lot of people have heard of this story, Jonah and the whale. This is a story where God's like, "Hey, go talk to those people in the city of Nineveh." And Jonah's like, "No, God, they're sacrificing each other, eating babies, and killing each other. Kill them. Wipe them out like you wiped out Sodom and Gomorrah." And God's like, "No, go and talk to them." And Jonah's like, "No, dude, I'm out." Gets on a boat, takes off on the boat, and then the waves crash, and then he's like, "Okay, God." And then the people are like, "Get off our boat." So they throw him off the boat, and the whale comes and swallows him, right? And then spits him up on the shores, and this is the story. And so then he's like, "Fine, I'll talk to the people of Nineveh." He talks to the people of Nineveh. They're all like, "Oh yeah," and he calls down fire from heaven. They all turn to God, right? Now, what's the difference between the people of Nineveh and the people of Sodom and Gomorrah? The people of Nineveh are human. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah are great men, or Nephilim.
Joseph Campbell, well-known professor of literature and highly regarded as an expert on both religion and myth, has noted several similarities between the story of Jonah and that of Jason in Greek mythology. This includes the names of the heroes, the presence of a dove, the idea of fleeing like the wind and causing a storm, the attitude of the sailors, and the presence of a sea monster or dragon threatening the hero or swallowing him. This is just one of the many examples of similar stories throughout many religions and cultures.
When you read the book of Enoch, you start to see this pattern, and all the stories that you've been told as a child in the Bible, they're very different than what you would suspect them to be. There's another example is when Moses goes into the promised land after escaping Egypt. Many of you have heard this story, but when he goes into the promised land, he sends in scouts. They come back and they say, "We don't want to go in there. There's giants." Again, that giant word is again the word Nephilim. Nephilim is what is in the city. Basically, giant beings that God says go in and kill every man, woman, and child. And that sounds kind of cruel and miserable and kind of terrible to some degree, but when you understand that these beings are not human, that them dying is actually sort of saving them from creating a longer race of them. So when it says kill every man, woman, and child, you gotta understand the context of what these Nephilim are. So the book of Enoch kind of explains what they are. Basically, it says that they're not fully flesh and they're not fully spirit. So what they are is when an angel came, these angels They're called Anakim, which is where we get the term Anunnaki, actually. They were the creators that created them. They came out of the spiritual realm and manifested into a physical body and mated with a human. And so their body and their soul were born in one. The book of Enoch says that they're not fully flesh, they're not fully spirit, that when their body dies, their spirit will forever remain trapped on earth and be referred to as an evil spirit. A lot of people see ghosts or demons or leprechauns or whatever, even Bigfoot to some degree, and even the lizard people, reptilians. All these things that they're seeing, they're not actually real things. They're not actually physical things. What they're seeing is disembodied half-angel humans that have lost their physical body, and all is left is their spirit. And their spirit once had a physical nature, so for some reason they're able to manifest a physical entity for just a split second and hang on to it. This is a thing that people talk about when regards to ghosts in your house and why they don't like cats. I don't know if you've heard this, but ghosts supposedly don't like cats. And the reason why is if you have a ghost in your house, get a cat as a solution, because these entities lost their body. So they're able to do things, little things, like push stuff off a shelf, make footsteps in your house, shut a door, do some weird supernatural boo-boo-boo-boo. They can do these things, but what happens is, let's say it takes a lot of their energy and their effort to do it. So let's say this Nephilim, half-angel human, he turned invisible. It's like, it would be basically like you dying and you turn invisible for the rest of your existence. Like, what are you gonna do? Like, you can walk around, you get bored at one point, eventually you're gonna be like, can I touch things? So let's say this half-angel human is like, I'm gonna push this cup off the shelf, and he's like trying all of his energy to trying to knock the cup off the shelf, and all of a sudden, boom, the cup goes flying off the shelf, and you're like, oh my God, did the cup just go flying off the shelf? And he's like, I'm validated, I'm real, and it's like giving him a sense of connection and validation and acceptance, right? So this is how Nephilim sort of exist at this point. They're disembodied half-angel humans. There is a group of Nephilim that still have a physical body. And this is where the reptilians come in. Aliens, according to a few different sources, there's a documentary on Vimeo called Higher Entities, and it explains some of these aliens in a little bit more in depth. And there's an individual, Stan Deo is his name, who talks about interacting and working with the government in direct connection with these alien entities. And according to Stan, he says that when you got up close to the aliens, their skin actually looks kind of scaly. Now, the aliens are a little bit more real than just ghosts. The aliens are a little bit more tangible, if you will. They are the non-deceased bodies of the Nephilim today. This is where I'm going to explain something about genetics. I know this from working with the geneticists. I did some stuff for as an artist and designer. Working with them, I got to ask a lot of questions about genetics. Like, hey, why don't you just take an alligator and take a chicken and blend it in the zygote stage and then see a creature be born, and all of a sudden you'll have a chicken alligator dinosaur. That's basically a raptor, right? So they've been working on this, trying to create these hybridization, chimeric type things. This is what happens. When you blend two creatures together, the creature will not live. It will grow up into the point of hatching or being born. It will take a breath and it will die. Now, this is a very strange thing. Geneticists have been trying to figure this out for a while. It's maybe not very popular. I only know this because of direct connection with the geneticists, but you can take a bat and a pig, blend them in a zygote stage, and it will grow a creature. And up until the point of it hatching, it will take its hatching breath or birthing breath, and it dies. We don't know why that's happening. Right now, just recently in the news, we announced the first monkey-human hybrid, and the government just awarded, I believe it was $4 billion to chimeric research, which is human and animal genetic splicing DNA, funded by our government, which is borderline unethical, because what is this creature born? Is it human? Does it have rights? Is it going to think like us? You know, it's been this taboo subject for a very long time, but ironically, this just happened a few months ago. So when you get into what these chimeric type creatures are, you got to reference back to the Bible or spirit realm or understanding of life in that regard, and you can kind of pull a comprehensive idea here. So I believe that when God sees the alligator and the chicken and mixes them, like when God sees an alligator, the alligator is born and a spirit is put in that alligator, and the spirit is what gives that alligator life. Now, the same with the chicken. It has a lesser spirit than what a human might have, but a spirit goes into it and has life. Now, when you blend the two together, I think God basically says, well, it's not a chicken, it's not an alligator. I'm not going to give it a spirit. I'm not going to give it life. And this is the interesting part. Well, this creature is still alive up until the point of birth, but it doesn't have a spirit. And that's when the entities, the disembodied half-angel humans that lost their body, can then basically hijack this creature and rebirth itself into the physical realm and give itself life again. And so the reptilians come from this sort of understanding. I think what has happened is the reptilians are a derivative of human genetics spliced with reptile and whatever other creatures that they sort of still look like human, but they have enough animal mixed in DNA that when the creature is growing up to the point of birth, it will be born and die. But at that moment, unless there is a Nephilim spirit present to inhabit that body and give it life. And throughout history, we actually have evidence of some of these types of things. We have found archaeological remains of things from Greek mythology, places like Mount Olympus and such. We have found sort of these type of spaces, and there is skulls that we have found that are anomalous, that we have tested and don't line up with any human genetics whatsoever. The Baraka skulls, these are skulls that have twice the brain cavity of any normal human. They've actually genetically tested them, and they are so dissimilar to humans that it's unmatchable. But yet we don't talk about these, but they're found all over the world. In fact, King Tut was one of these things. They call them Coneheads. In fact, the movie Coneheads came from the fact that we were finding these skulls all over, and we were like, hey, what are these giant, huge skulls with twice the brain cavity of a normal human? Well, they've got to be aliens. Nefertiti's was one of them, and Nefertiti's had 6 daughters in Egyptology, and they all were projected and drawn in that way with these elongated cone heads. That's why Egyptians wear those funny hats to kind of disguise whether they were one of those beings with those weird elongated cone heads. Again, those were descendants of Nephilim. And Nefertiti's, and ironic, you can look at her name as Nefertiti's, which Neph in Egypt means beautiful one, but you got to think, where did the term beautiful one come from? And all of the beings, all the people in Egyptology that have these weird cone head things have the words Neph, like Nefertum, Nefer-Oskep. Like these are all different Egyptian rulers and names that all possess the word Neph in their name, and ironically have this elongated cone-looking head, which ties into, again, mixing of genetics, again, which is also in Egypt. So that's my perception on reptilians.
It is clearly seen in many hieroglyphics of various cultures that humanoid creatures, some human and some part animal, are depicted. At times, they are even larger in stature. Were our ancient ancestors experimenting with genetics from technology given to us by the Nephilim? Or were the Nephilim exploring genetic and DNA splicing on humans and animals? While some believe that these reptilian beings are extraterrestrial in nature, others are more convinced that they are interdimensional or extra-dimensional creatures and can manifest themselves in various different realms beyond what humans can recognize.
When I say extra-dimensional being, I'm referring to something that is sort of like the being that I saw when I was a child. I saw this glowing being. I kind of shared that story, but that glowing being was able to manifest into a physical world and then in a second vaporized. So when we say extra dimensional being, what I mean is like there is a realm. Again, there's colors and there is light and there is sound that we are not able to perceive. There is the mantis shrimp, I believe it is. There's a shrimp that actually can see a broader spectrum of colors. There's a lot of colors and light and things going on around us. And when I say extra-dimensional, what I mean is it is something that exists in the color spectrum, the light spectrum, and the sound spectrum to which we don't actually perceive. It's almost like there is an overlaying world on top of our world that these beings can go from this realm into this realm and into this realm, and they can kind of, it like overlays Earth, but it's a different realm and it's perceived on different levels.
Some theorists believe that people with mental illness, such as schizophrenia or paranoia, who see or hear things, may be channeling or tuning into another dimension, or possibly light or sound waves, due to a chemical imbalance that unaffected persons don't perceive because of normal brain function.
And in fact, when we talk about perception on different levels, this is a very interesting fact about Tesla. Tesla is one of the earliest inventors of the radio. And I don't know if you know this, but when Tesla created the radio, the first thing he started to notice was he was hearing voices coming through the radio, which is mind-blowing because no one else had a radio. And he said specifically, these voices sounded like humans talking in a language he did not understand. Now, take that for what you will. I mean, the guy's pretty brilliant. You can look at the stuff that he says. I don't think he was crazy per se, but you gotta wonder, what did he mean by that? In fact, this drove him so mad that he wanted to build the biggest radio ever to pick up on all of the voices that he was hearing. So they did this. They built this giant radio tower that they started working on that eventually he died before they finished it, but they canceled the project when they found out the reason why he wanted to build the tower was because he wanted to hear and listen to the voices that he was getting from his radio device, which is valid. Like, I mean, the man said he was hearing voices. Now, my theory personally is that he might have been able to decode some of these voices, and what these voices might actually have been were the angels, the Nephilim spirits speaking on that frequency that humans just didn't pick up on. And he happened to create a device that was able to pick up the frequencies and was able to listen in on what these beings were saying. And in fact, there is a famous person, I believe that it was called The Conjuring of Ra. She was a medium, famous medium that did a whole interview process with some individuals talking about conjuring this spirit, Ra. Ironically, Ra happens to be, again, one of the Egyptian gods. In conjuring this spirit Ra, the spirit even says a misnomer and tries to play off that Tesla was one of them. And so the woman doing the conjuring through Ra says that Tesla was one of the spiritual entities that were aliens, that were superpowers, that created the world. And Tesla was reborn as a human to advance society, and his memory was taken away when he was reborn as a human. And so that's why he knew all those things that he knew. When the reality is, I think he might have been picking up on the angel's language and decoded some of it and created some of the devices he actually made that was from over-listening to the voices that he was hearing on the radio. So, very interesting, strange fact people don't know about.
Similar to what some believe is Tesla receiving his knowledge from a supernatural source, advocates say the Nazis were also given intelligence on advanced technologies because of their nefarious fascination with demonic and occult practices. It is also said that Jack Parsons, an American rocket engineer, chemist, and known cultist, was given the technology for the first rocket engine by a demonic entity, which was most likely a Nephilim being. A giant is a being of human appearance, sometimes of prodigious size and strength, common in folklore. They have been depicted throughout time and legends, fairy tales, theater movies, and television shows. Every country and culture has myths and stories about giants. Can the truth about these behemoths be stranger than fiction?
The eyes of that species of extinct giant, whose bones fill the mountains of America, have gazed on Niagara Falls as our eyes do now. That is a very interesting quote, I gotta tell you, because he's not talking about the eyes of the species of extinct giants. What he's talking about is how big and how amazing Niagara Falls is. He just so happens to be referencing the eyes of species of extinct giants whose bones fill the mountains of America as if it was common knowledge and everyone in America knew this. There's other presidential quotes. I have a book of some of those quotes of different presidents talking about giants. Now, you probably didn't know this because for the last 300 years, America has been scrubbing the history of giants existing in America. And you gotta ask yourself why.
Because they don't want you to know the truth. And some people say that the Nephilim are coming back. In the end times, the Nephilim will return, the return of the Nephilim.
There's a lot of things about America that you don't know. But the fact that Abraham Lincoln mentions clearly that references a race of extinct giants, you gotta wonder, what does that mean? Well, look into some of this stuff and you can find out all of our earlier explorers also talk about giants. Christopher Columbus, when he first gets to America, it's very difficult, mind you, to find Christopher Columbus's writings. And again, Christopher Columbus is demonized and told you he's a horrible person and he is, a colonizer and a bad person. That's because they don't want you to read his writings. Because when you actually read Christopher Columbus's writings, he talks about two groups of Indians. In fact, when he first gets here, there's a group of Indians that are nice tan skin, beautiful people, very kind, simple people, and he does say something like easy to manipulate for slavery. Then he says there's another group of Indians that are twice the size of a normal man. They are deformed with dog faces, and they are giants and they eat people. So what happened with America is when people got to America, they heard these rumors of giant, savage Indians that ate people, and they come over in ships and they're like, and they see the other Indians, and they totally forget the other Indians are even a thing, and they're like, they see them like, oh my God, are those the Indians that eat people? And the other guys are kind of like, well, no, no, and then like, they go and they just murder them. They wipe out a lot of the population of Native Americans because they heard the rumors of giant Indians that eat people, and they totally forget the fact that they were giant. But you see what happened was Christopher Columbus got here, the Native Americans, the normal ones, saw the guns that Christopher Columbus had and were like, oh my gosh, can we have those so we can kill the giant Indians that keep eating us? And so Christopher Columbus gave them the guns and they went and wiped them out. So they died pretty fast. There was not a lot of them left by that time. And even the Aztec talk about this, and even Magellan talks about this. He actually, in his log, talks about coming across 4 giants. Mind you, everything else in his log is pretty bland. But he comes across 4 giants, he says, and 2 of them they trick because they're the size of a normal man, but they're children, so they're naive. They're able to trick them into shackles, thinking they're bracelets or whatever. And then they trick these 2 giants. They freak out. The giants scream. They get them onto the boat, and then they die of scurvy because they have to consume more than a normal man can consume. And they die, and the rotting carcasses of these 2 dead giants were so terrible that they dumped the giants' bodies overboard. And this is in his log. You gotta wonder, like, wait, what? This is in his log. And then Hernan Cortez, one of the earlier explorers who came to America, which was the motivation for Christopher Columbus, again, talks about giants. Hernan Cortez, into lexicon, comes in contact with the Aztec and the people in the area, and they present to him giant bones. And he says it, again, in his log, that the leg bone from the hip to the knee was as tall as I am. That's a quote. You can actually look this up still on the internet and read his talkings. And he says that he shipped the giant bones to Kassel by the first ship that he could, which ended up in the Vatican, which also is where a lot of these skeletons and giant remains and anomalies end up, but they also go missing once they get there, ironically. All the earlier explorers, and even Amerigo Vespucci, whom America is named after supposedly, again, has a story in his log about interacting with giants, which is fascinating because he says we basically see these Native American women and they're beautiful and we try to kidnap them. And the Native American men come out and fight them off. They jump on their boats, they take off, they land on an island across the way, and out of the island comes giants. They said the beings were so frightening, they jumped back in their boat and went back to deal with the other Indians that were going to kill them for trying to steal for their women. And it's such a funny thing to hear in the story in the log. But again, the school system and someone in power doesn't want you to know about this, and you got to wonder why. So that's kind of where a lot of this reptilian deception comes from, is because there's something being hidden about these giants. There's Indian burial mounds all over. In fact, there's a show on Amazon Prime talking about the Native Americans right now, and a professor, I forget his name, but there's a professor that specifically says that he discovered a giant skeleton. And this giant skeleton was taken by the Smithsonian, and he doesn't know what happened to it. We do have remains that we have admitted to exist of these giants now. They call them Denisovans.
The Denisovans, or Denisova hominids, are an extinct species or subspecies of archaic human that ranged across Asia during the lower and middle Paleolithic. But bones have been found in other parts of the world. Bone fragments and teeth have taught us that these subspecies were much larger than humans today and could have been as big as 18 feet tall.
You can look up the size of their skull that they have found so far. The skull that they have is supposedly of a 15-foot tall person. They also found a tooth that was featured on National Geographic, and this is pretty recent. That tooth is of a supposed 18-foot tall human. I'm like 6 foot. That's like 3 of me tall. That's so, and they're admitting to some of this now. Finally. But they've been hiding it for years, many years.
Some people say that this thing that's happening right now with all these UFOs, we're admitting there's UFOs, it's part of a mass deception that's about to be sprung on humanity, basically. And anything to scare people, and it's completely in line with actual revelation in scriptures. Revelation where there'll be signs and wonders and great signs that will be in the end times. Fascinating stuff. We've never been so close, with all these things. I mean, the Pope, our Pope now is the Black Pope. He's a Black Pope. He's a Jesuit general.
The idea of there being a Black Pope in the end times does not come from the Bible, but rather from the visions of Saint Malachi. In the 12th century and 139 AD, Saint Malachi had a vision in which revealed to him that there would be 112 more popes, with the last one being the Black Pope. Interestingly, the current Pope Francis I, is Pope number 112.
There never have been a Jesuit that was a Pope ever in the history of popes. Okay? I did research for a guy who was doing a movie on the Black Pope. People go, oh, that's Anton LaVey. No, it's not. It's the Black Pope is the head of the Jesuit General Order. They have a church on the Vatican grounds called the Temple of Geshu. I was doing research and found all these pictures of Hans Klovenbach, the former Black Pope. I found a picture of the Temple of Geshu with a van outside of it and 2 reptilians carrying a boy into the church. This was a black and white picture I found online. And the reptilians didn't even bother me. I mean, I'm like, okay, well, demon, whatever, But what was driving the van blew my mind. What was it? It was a cow. And this isn't like Hanna-Barbera. It wasn't a cartoon. And it wasn't, National Geographic. So what is a cow driving a car for, a van? And then I realized, in the ancient world, they worshiped cows as deities. So it was a demonic manifestation of a cow. So yeah, and really, literally later on, all those pictures were removed from my computer, just gone. People have no idea that the actual Pope right now is a black Pope, and yeah, it's not. Nothing is what it seems.
The Black Pope and the Jesuits have been the target of conspiracies since